Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources to hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my esteemed co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing, man?
Well, I got kind of overwhelmed putting together the stories for the show. There's so many things breaking. I could talk for 2 hours, but I'm sick and tired of listening to myself. So we'll go back and forth. And we have
Okay.
guests coming. Who do you have next week?
Next week, we're talking about universal basic income, and we have Eno Schmidt, University of Freiburg in Germany, and Diana Blackwell from Central Harlem, and we will probably have a special UBI guest as well, yet to be determined. And week after next, we have Congressman Yvette Clarke from Central Brooklyn. It's going to be on talking about digital equity, so that's something I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, digital equity could mean something. Usually it's an empty slogan.
Yeah.
But so there's a whole lot of things, like almost every large company's move to privacy, which usually doesn't do very much for privacy. And what I'm going to open up with, Facebook's attempt to seriously change the United States Constitution. Oh, excuse me, I'm misspeaking. Facebook is all over my email and the Washington press and the political press with a ridiculous campaign saying things like, the last time we changed the rules of the internet, we sent the requirements over by fax. And various other things that are just colorful ways to say that most of the internet rules were made in the 1990s, which is 25 years ago. And therefore, obviously, they need change. Section 230, which has protection for corporate speech, is the one that's most visible. There's a whole lot of them. Well, if something that was 25 years old needs major changes now, I think our Constitution is almost 250 years old.
Yeah.
I think Mark Zuckerberg feels the US Constitution is widely out of date and need major changes to keep up with what Mark Zuckerberg wants.
Well, what's he proposing, Dave? What's the latest coming from him?
Nothing.
So this is just window dressing or what?
They haven't given any details publicly, which means that they're sitting behind with $100 million worth of lobbying and ad budget, doing things behind the scene. Bill Kennard, when he was FCC chair, was asked, why are all these awful policies coming from Washington? And he said, well, there are these people I call black ninjas. They work by night and are very, very good. And far too much of what comes out of Washington is made by these very expensive lobbyists. And they are very, very good. And Facebook and Google have hired a pile of them. Some of whom were friends of mine. Used to be, Facebook and Google couldn't keep up with the telcos in lobbying, but the last 5-6 years, they've changed that. And the number that they're spending $100 million to influence Washington, it's a real number, although none of it's public and I couldn't prove it. The reason I wanted to bring that to the radio and the show is to talk about what they want. And I will guarantee you, even though I have no information on what they're actually saying, that they want a set of rules that handicap their opponents, but not as big deal for somebody the size of Facebook. For example, there's lots of proposals out there to require flagging videos being uploaded for possible copyright violations. That doesn't work. There's so many ways around them that they're not very useful, but the record companies and the TV companies want it. And there's some European regulations on this stuff. Now, since it doesn't work, you have to spend a fortune to make it almost work. Facebook is so big, they can spend a fortune on it. But if somebody wanted to compete with Facebook, or even any of the dozens of small video services out there, and they went talking to the vendors who can make these filter packages, and were told, yeah, $40 million and another $10 million a year, that could be very discouraging. The two guys who started YouTube did it with almost no money, a lot of chutzpah, and among other things, a big video distributor, Limelight, fronting them the bandwidth on credit. The guy at Limelight who did it, I met at a show where he explained, yeah, we try to be good to new companies because you never know what will happen. Chad Hurley at another sort of disreputable guy came in and talked to me about what they wanted to do. And they had no money and not a great business plan, but I said, we've got a lot of bandwidth. Let's give it a try. And that was YouTube. They sold it to Google for $2.5 billion a few years later. Yeah. We're a very good client for Limelight, and so on. And when we look at the way what's happening is that Google and YouTube have enough power to sway the debate and have real pros now working on it. So the Republicans are all coming for regulating Facebook because they sometimes do things like shut down Donald Trump. Now, Facebook does not have an anti-conservative bias. Kevin Roose did a thing of who were the 10 most popular sites on Facebook. Redid it again last week. None of them were conservatives like Franklin Graham and Ben Shapiro. Mm-hmm. So in fact, there is not a conservative bias, an anti-conservative bias. If anything, it's working out the other way because the conservatives learned how to play the game and they have really fervent folks. So a lot of that debate is on First Amendment basics. And another side of it is on 230, which is a thing that says you basically can't sue Facebook for something that some user put up instead of Facebook doing it. And the Republicans want to get Donald Trump back on. Even before they shut down Donald Trump, the Republicans are screaming about this. The Democrats want to get rid of what they call misinformation. And there's a whole lot of lies being put, among other things by the Republicans who have Neanderthal positions on things like whether or not Texas should be careful about COVID. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden, about an hour ago, that Abbott, the Republican conservative governor of Texas, has just eliminated mask, restaurant, and all other requirements about COVID. And Joe Biden said, that's a Neanderthal point of view. Mm-hmm. I think any Neanderthals around should feel insulted. Okay, now, shall I take more on the Facebook and these?
I just want to get back to a point that you were making, which is a little subtle, but I think it was powerful. And that is some of the solutions that people like Facebook are looking at and proposing would be so cost prohibitive to a new entrant or to a smaller platform operator that they basically would serve as a barrier of entry or as a way to keep out other voices, other platforms on the internet. And Facebook, it sounds like what you're saying is kind of doing this in the name of privacy and protecting privacy, and yet it's such a hugely costly mechanism for others, not for them, that it serves a dual purpose. One, it makes them look like they're doing something, and two, it serves to keep out competition. Did I hear you right?
Well, Google's got it even better. Google is knocking out third-party cookies that somebody like the New York Times uses to track you around the web to see what ads you're going to sell for you. Chrome is going to block them all by the end of this year. At least that's the plan.
And that's in the name of privacy, or what's their rationale?
Yeah, it's definitely in the name of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Washington Post story said people don't like being tracked, even if it's just for ads and not anything more intrusive. Frankly, it may be good to know I'm so old that I'm not likely to be buying diapers and not get too many ads for diapers. And if I go to an airline site and look at the price of trips to Paris, it might be, if one of the airlines has a discount fare to Paris, I wouldn't mind seeing that. So tracking for ads, to my mind, is trivial or just uninteresting for privacy, but a lot of people don't like it, and that's fine. So what would happen, or what will happen, when Google puts in this role on Chrome, which is about half the browsers on Earth, I would guess? Well, it's not going to affect Google, because Google has so much information about everybody by looking at what we search for in Chrome, certainly of the people using Chrome, what we do in Gmail, where we've been in the past, and a whole lot of other things, that they're going to be able to target just fine. And they said they have an elaborate concern that they will only let advertisers target by large groups, so they can't target you individually. Nobody the size of, say, the New York Times has anything like that level of information. Won't be able to do that level of targeting, and either has to spend more money buying ads, probably from Google, or go through Google's system because their targeting isn't working and Google's targeting has the information. Okay, so Google has a remarkable privacy initiative that somehow seems to reduce anybody who doesn't happen to be Google.
So in the name of protecting privacy and not having cookies that track your behavior on the internet, they're actually making it harder for others to do it and enhancing their position and their value because
they don't need that kind of cookie.
Yeah,
they've got the information anyway. Now, this is, of course, what every good lobbyist has been doing for many years. And in fact, Carl Bode has been really strong on how much of the anti-Google stuff has been coming from AT&T, which sees Google as their big competition.
Wait, run that back again, Dave. Anti-Google stuff coming from AT&T?
Yeah.
Wow, what's that look like?
AT&T for years has been criticizing Google in policy circles, routinely. The main thing they've been saying lately is that Google should be regulated. And of all unlikely things, although they don't use the word, should not be able to favor different sources of programming, i.e., they're demanding net neutrality be applied to Google.
Now that's funny.
Yeah. Now it happens to be right that you don't want something with a firm with a near monopoly to have any control on this. whether it's AT&T, Google, or Amazon. And the CEO of AT&T actually was in an interview in the Washington Post website, talking about something had to be done about how much Amazon was demanding from companies like AT&T in order to be on the Amazon Video app. Because if you have a smart TV that's working off Amazon system, they have to pay Amazon to get home box.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had John Stankey actually tell the Washington Post that we need net neutrality rules on Amazon.
Wow, what a turning of the tables, huh?
Well, I'll let somebody else decide. Let me stick on the privacy thing and go back, because there's another part of the story that most people in this country don't know. India, South Africa, and Turkey and Russia are all objecting to Facebook's major assault on privacy via WhatsApp. Facebook has said, they sent out a notice to everybody that all the information you gave WhatsApp, including your identity, would be shared with the company that owns WhatsApp, which is Facebook. Now, they've put that off for a few months because some people got angry. Among those who got angry were the European commissioners, who pointed out that as part of the deal to buy WhatsApp, Facebook had agreed not to share data. And if they shared data, not merely would that breach that agreement, it would be breaching the European Union privacy laws. So the current plan by Facebook, that they've said officially, is that they will have different rules for Europe and for the rest of the world. News today, privacy commissioner in South Africa said, we wrote our privacy rules by basing them on what Europe was doing. Our rules apply just as much. And why is Facebook having different rules for Europe and for Africa? Jumped right in hard. Turkey is coming on. India has now, a big thing that's getting people worried, because India has more internet users than the United States and Western Europe combined.
Wow.
And is growing. Well, there are 1.3 billion people there.
Wow.
Yeah. So the biggest story on the internet the last 5 years is how many Indians have connected, which is about 500 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of folks, man.
It should be changing the internet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, that kind of, I don't want to segue away from the privacy, because I think there's still some stuff that you want to say about that. But as a side issue, you know, I read a piece, and I think it was in the Times either yesterday or today, talking about the regionalization of the internet and the rise of some e-commerce sites like Jumia in Africa, and another one, I think, in Indonesia. And
sounds good to me. They shouldn't, Africa and Indonesia should not be reached by Uber and Airbnb and Amazon sending all the money to the West Coast.
I agree. I mean, I'm just wondering, is this a real trend? I mean, I was encouraged to see it. I mean, is it really happening?
It's so hard to fight the monopolies like Amazon and Google, that it's a small trend at best. And India is screaming. India just passed a major law that regulated social media. It said a number of things, including that a company the size of Facebook has to have a presence in India so that if they break Indian law, something can be done. It had a whole lot of privacy objections, including to the WhatsApp data takeover that South Africa just joined in today. The Indian press is really big on this. And so are a lot of people in the US, because one of the requirements of the law is it didn't say that Facebook, WhatsApp had to monitor people's conversations and share them with the government. But it did have to design the system so they could at least find out who and where sent a particular conversation or email.
Who and where what, Dave? Who sent it?
Particular.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the next time some Muslim gets angry at the very real repression of Muslims in India and shoots up a hotel and kills 25 people or more, I forget how many they got in that episode. India wants to be able to figure out who the people who have been sending him email and talking to him on WhatsApp are, so they can look at what's going on. They're demanding that as their right as a sovereign government. They're demanding that in India, 500 million users, Facebook finds a way to obey the Indian law that they have to design a system that will let them know who's been talking to the latest mass terrorist.
Mm-hmm. Is there such a requirement in the US for Facebook?
Absolutely not. Although the head of the FBI and the last president of the United States has called for it often.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons they haven't got it through is it turns out that there are tools that even can crack the kind of encryption that Apple and Facebook are using so they can get the information. So when the cases went to court, the defense from Apple was that you don't need us to change our encryption standard because you have tools, the most famous of which comes from Israel and is used by half the dictatorial regimes in the world, including the Arab ones, can crack it anyway. So there's a huge question all over the world about whether Facebook and Google should obey the law where they happen to be doing business.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need my opinion on that one, although I've given it often. Let's go to another story.
Okay, well, before we do, let me just say that you're listening to Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein, and we're talking about social media in the context of today's political environment, not just here in the U.S., but globally, and in particular, privacy and
the U.S. is far behind it.
In what regard? In privacy or
privacy requirements?
Okay.
Europe has a relatively weak one, but it's not as weak as the U.S., which, among other things, as I was talking before, has limits the sharing of data between WhatsApp and Facebook. We don't have anything like that.
Yeah, the European Union just passed a big law, 2 years ago, I think, Dave, on that, right? Yeah.
Our dear friends at the Internet Society incidentally opposed that law.
Did they?
Yeah, of course. It's a regulation of the internet, and they don't believe that anybody should be regulating the internet in any way whatsoever.
That's kind of scary. Well, I mean, especially given what we see today, Dave. I mean, and this is something I want to get your feedback on. This is the first time in my lifetime, and I've been around for a while, as you have as well, where I'm actually rooting for the FBI to get the bad guys, i.e. the white supremacists and the domestic terrorists that, not only went after the Capitol on January 6th, but have been kind of brewing and stirring up under the, kind of the underbelly of this country for, last couple hundred years. And,
No, it's not a couple hundred years. It definitely can be traced back to the 1620s.
Okay. 400 years. Yeah,
Uh,
sorry about that. I misspoke.
they had
Yeah,
slaves in New
that's
York
that's right.
in 1645.
That's right. Um, but
Well,
I guess what I'm saying, Dave, is you and I are creatures of the '60s. We go back a ways, and we remember J. Edgar Hoover and COINTEL, and just the really egregious things that law enforcement did to track and monitor and even kill black folks, brown folks, dissidents of all colors, and today, fast forward, 50 years later, they have so many tools now, but kind of the script has been flipped in that these folks, i.e., I'm talking about now the white supremacists and the domestic terrorists, the modern day KKK folks, and I'm actually rooting for the government to go after these guys, and I'm wondering what your thinking is on that. And in particular, some of the internet tools and things that are available potentially to law enforcement to help root that out. What's your
they're
take on that?
using it quite well.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that your cell phone tracks you constantly is resulting in the arrest of slews of people who were in the Capitol building on the 6th of January,
Mm-hmm.
who shouldn't have been there. And they're locating them by the cell phone tracking.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Not to mention all the video that cell phones recorded at the time, and folks have been sharing that and posting and on social media. I mean, the images that are out there, there's got to be millions of them.
the gang couldn't shoot straight, Jim Redson once pointed out. And a thing that was about real gangsters, and pointed out that why they have become mythologized and so on, and the mafia gets lots of movies made about them. The real gangsters are usually pretty dumb. It's not the thing. It doesn't get the brightest people coming into that. They're not sophisticated like Marlon Brando and Al Pacino.
Uh-huh.
And that turns out also to be true of a lot of people who rioted in Washington. The bloody idiots didn't realize that if they put it up on Facebook, the FBI might be able to track them down.
How about that?
Now, the Indians are saying they don't want the encryption that might make it harder to track them down. And that's what the issue is about. And of course, in India, they have far more political killings than we have in the United States. Lots of them.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in Kashmir.
Wow.
And, every so often, they get angry at the local Muslims, and rumors spread on Facebook, and a dozen people get killed or burned to death. That happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the ones you're looking at here, years ago, my old friend Vern George said, "Why do you think we're any different?" He was 2 years old in 1938 when he got out of Germany. Now, we are different. Donald Trump is not a Nazi. But those tendencies and the willingness to believe the big lies certainly are very prominent.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I listened on Monday, and I'm forgetting her name. She's a Black woman who teaches at Hunter College, who looks at this confirmation bias and so on, and knows all the literature, professor. And she said that there's been some studies about confirmation bias, and we all know about the lies that are being believed by the right in the United States at the moment, and the anti-vaxxers and so on. And they actually believe things that anybody with any common sense or objectivity knows is ridiculous. Left-wing and Democrats are almost as vulnerable to the same bias. on different issues. But that we aren't much different. It's just the Republican right-wingers have taken some really murderous choices.
Yeah. You know, Dave, you probably know this better than I, because I remember you talking about your grandpapa, I think it's your granddad, who kept a copy of Mein Kampf in his library just so he could know what the other guys were thinking about. But I looked up, quote, the big lie. And apparently this was something that the term that was coined in Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, as a way to say something that's so outrageous that you put it out there, that it's so outrageous that people say, oh, well, it must be true, because you wouldn't make up a lie that outrageous. And the big lie was a propaganda tool invented by Hitler, or at least certainly.
You repeat it enough times, and it's something that people want to believe. Many people believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And many people in Germany believed that the reason they lost World War I was because the Jews sold them out and persuaded the German general staff and the Kaiser to give up on the war. Historians don't see it that way. And to the extent I know World War I history, what happened was that the German general staff, when the United States, which had a population that was bigger than France, Germany, England, and Austria-Hungary put together, came into the war in 1917, the Germans decided that in a year or two, they wouldn't be able to resist the amount of cannon fodder the Americans were going to supply. They had a major offensive near the end of the war. They threw everything they had at it in the hope of ending the war by taking Paris. It was beat back. And the German general staff said to the Kaiser and the politicians, we're about to lose, do what you have to. And then something every historian knows about, in the treaty after the war, as John Maynard Keynes put out, took a terrible price in retribution against Germany. It failed badly. 15 years later, the Germans were going to war again. But that's something I'm not really much of an expert on. But anybody who's watched the United States in the last 5 years understands how powerful lies can be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the lies I see around Democrats are not nearly as ugly, but some of them are pretty bad. For example, it turns out that 95+% of the problem with getting everybody connected in the United States is that people don't have enough money. Not that there's no physical connection available.
Mm-hmm.
And that data is from Boston Consulting Group, done for Common Sense Media, and a pile of other sources. I checked it, it's solid. In addition to which, the 5% who may not be able to get a connection now, nearly all of them are about to be connected through the $10 billion BTOP program that the Republican FCC pushed through before the end of last year, and has loads of problems, but it's going to connect 3/4 or more of the remaining 5 million. Joe Biden thinks we should spend $40 billion because the rural broadband is so bad and something has to be done to give everybody the chance to be connected. It's going through in the $1.9 trillion stimulus. The bit about why we need the people in the rural areas that can't be connected and why this is terrible and why that's so important and why we need tens of billions of dollars to do it. Well, I've watched for years AT&T and Verizon and the little phone companies, and even the cable companies are getting in on it now, push these ideas through Washington and persuade the New York Times to write articles about how important the people who go to McDonald's to use the Wi-Fi or the McDonald's parking lot because there's no way they can connect at home. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are 5 million homes that we can't connect right now except for satellite. It may be down to 3 million, the data's old, but there is that. There are 110 million that could get a connection next week from the cable company, but don't have the money.
Yeah.
But all you hear in Washington is about the need to give money to the rural areas, which don't hear. Couldn't spend it on anything worthwhile if they tried. Because as I say, BTOP is already connecting almost every. Oh, excuse me.
So is that part of what we hear Biden talk about his infrastructure plan? I just read a piece just the other day that broadband is part of his internet infrastructure plan.
A total ripoff, and a lot of good liberal Democrats have heard so often. Part of the big lie, if you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it.
Yeah.
That they can't. The other part of the big lie is what every psychologist would call confirmation bias. It is very, very hard for any human to listen to and accept something that disagrees with what they already believe in. So all the congressmen who 10 years ago were persuaded we had to do something for the rural areas, now that the data comes out and I put it in front of the face of people at the FCC with all the data, they can't see it, they can't believe it. Mm-hmm. Which is the same thing that is going on to the people who don't believe Trump lost the election. Most of them. It's so hard for most of them to believe it that the evidence is pretty clear that that was not a fraudulent election. But they can't hear that, they can't believe it. Confirmation bias is that strong. And we on the left, when they actually test people on it, or Democrats versus Republicans, which is what the studies that she was talking about was, are just as vulnerable to it. It's just we just don't have anything nearly as, we have lots of wasteful things, we have lots of stupid things. There's an enormous number of people who thought 3, 4 years ago that if they ended net neutrality, as the Republicans were going to do when they took over the FCC, it would be the end of the internet as we know it. And nearly none of them could come out to anything that significantly affected many people's internet experience. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it turned out that today, in the actual situation, wasn't going to be such a big issue one way or another, because it would have been stupid for the telcos and cable companies to abuse the power that the Republicans gave them. And they were smart enough not to take advantage of it. So that would happen. Small things in the background. How much Netflix had to pay Comcast happened. But nothing really changed fundamentally what the internet is like, and nothing like how the internet is now controlled by 4 or 5 giant companies, which are not Comcast and AT&T anymore. 15 years ago, I said the CEO of AT&T was the most powerful man on the internet because he had the international AT&T network and 40% of the United States in his domestic broadband. Didn't have any TV, and that was before the Googles, the YouTubes, and the Facebooks became so big. Now, the guy's in Washington, his successor is in Washington virtually begging Washington to find a way to lower how much Amazon can charge him. which
So
is
who would you say are the most powerful 3 or 4 people or entities in terms of the internet globally right now?
well, the power internationally is overwhelmingly Google, Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
and Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Overwhelmingly.
Now, Amazon, a lot of folks don't know. I think you're probably also talking about the servers that they control. Talk just a little bit about that, Dave, because that's something that's kind of maybe invisible to regular folks.
Uh, when Amazon Web Services went down, a quarter of the internet in the United States was out for a couple of hours, just a few months ago, because it turns out that Amazon is really good at running servers, and a few giant servers are more efficient than even an outfit as big as Netflix putting in their own services. So an awful lot, and nearly every startup pays Amazon Web Services or Microsoft or Google or Baidu, Tencent, or Huawei to share their servers in these enormous data centers that are called the cloud, which is one of the things Amazon has. The other thing Amazon has is it dominates so much of commerce that the cell phone dealers in India are begging the government to prevent Amazon from wiping them out of business.
Mm-hmm.
There is an Indian alternative to Amazon, which Walmart bought most of last year. And they're fighting it out, and they're both willing to lose money. And the ordinary cell phone dealers are in the middle of it, and they're getting wiped out. Happens a whole lot. But we know how powerful they are in the United States. Well, most people in the United States don't know how powerful they are. And you ask me, who's the most powerful? Well, you've got to add Ambani to that.
Who's that?
He's one of the 10 most powerful people in the internet and virtually in the world. Mukesh Ambani owns Reliance and Jio. He's the richest man in India. About 6 months ago, he was the richest man in Asia, but his stock prices have gone down a little since then. And some of the Chinese stock prices have gone up. He has enormous power with Modi's government. He has 400 million 4G subscribers on his Jio service that he just started 5 years ago. And has put the prices so low that 7 out of 10 of the biggest Indian ISPs went out of business within 3 years. It's already happened. It's not happening. And by putting the prices low, connected 400 million more people, and drove the survivor, Bharti Airtel and VI, to match his price or something. So Bharti is now, and when we're talking about low prices, we're talking about basic service for $2 a month and decent service for $5 to $10 a month. Wow. Not quite unlimited. That's why I know the prices are too high. But I'm mentioning Ambani, although we're running out of time. But the relevant thing here is Ambani, who made his money in oil and gas. He's the biggest oil refiner in India, among other things, and owns slews of retail stores, which helps sell his cell phone service. Is he decided he wanted to take over financial payments in India. You know, when you go to the store and you give a MasterCard or you give Google Pay or Apple Pay, and they just put in the proposal, they being Ambani in the lead and his two partners, Google and Facebook, who decided that they wouldn't be able politically to get that kind of power in India's finances. because India needs them like a home, and they have a very sophisticated banking sector. But if they took a piece of Ambani's offering, he would have a political clout to get it through, and they could make the enormous amount of money that they think they're going to make in financial tech and payment systems. So they had to go to him to get into India. And India is the second biggest internet country in the world. And both of them are essentially cut out of the biggest, which is China. Last thing I'm going to throw you is it's getting harder for them to get into China. There's a big dispute about sending equipment to China that can make chips. Just blew up today because the Chinese chip maker SMIC filed a piece of paper that said they were buying $1.4 billion worth of equipment from a Dutch company to make advanced chips. It turned out to be a red herring. It was just paperwork on something they had bought 2 years ago, but hadn't all been delivered yet. But most of it, it's a long ago order. But the Reuters story, I should talk to the Reuters reporter, was about how on Monday, a US government team, the Artificial Intelligence something or other survey group or whatever, but it's a .gov, and has a spook as its co-lead, was opposing sending any chip-making machine to China because, of course, any chips that China makes might go to the Chinese military, and we want to keep them back in the dark ages, or as close to it as we can get. As close to it as we can get is 4-year-old chips instead of today's chips, which is what they're about. And when I looked at this board, which has 15 members, I saw a top spook. The other code lead was Eric Schmidt, who until recently was the head of Google. In the 15 members was a representative from Google today, Microsoft, and Oracle. So they're saying they're trying to keep chips away. Oh, and from Intel, from their competitors in China. Now, what's going to happen is within 5 or 10 years, China will have matched the capability of the Dutch, who make the most advanced chip-making machines in the world, and the Japanese, and the Americans, who actually are a relatively small player in this, because they have no other choice. They can't afford to be behind the rest of the world in chips. So they're going to do whatever it takes for the 1.3 billion Chinese to be able to make the most advanced chips, just like the Taiwanese and the South Koreans can. So in the long run, it's not going to make any big difference to the Chinese. It'll kill the sales of Huawei cell phones for the next 2 or 3 years and things like that. But that's why China can't afford not to. And somebody born in Shanghai or Shenzhen or Beijing is just as smart as somebody born in Chicago or San Jose or San Diego. Mm-hmm. And with the right resources, they can come up with anything we can come up with, and they will. Yeah. So it's a very foolish policy. Is it time?
Yeah, I think we're about done, Dave. We've covered a lot of ground here on community and technology. And any final thoughts? We've got about 30 seconds. Any final comments for our audience?
Next week, basic minimum income. Mm-hmm. Actually, the right thing. And I can tell you from my experience, because when I started getting Social Security, which took some of the financial purpose off, it took 2 or 3 years for me to catch up. But my life is different because of it. Yeah. And I'm sure that's going to be true for everybody who's really struggling, for the people who are making $7 an hour minimum wage, mm-hmm. and so many other states. And I believe I live in a Christian country, and I believe some Jew boy 2,000 years ago had a lot of things about how the poor must be treated better.
Yeah. Okay.
Jesus
Well, with that,
wanted you.
thank you, Dave. Okay, this has been Community and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. Thanks for tuning in. This is 90.3 WHCR FM. See you next week. Thanks, Dave. Good night.